If you will, turn in your Bibles to the 9th chapter, the book of Genesis, as we continue our study through the Word. And so last time we looked at the way that Noah was delivered through the storm, through the flood. And we looked at the way that he had sent the dove out, and the dove brought back the sprig. We watched as the waters receded, and as Noah and his family stayed on the ark for beginning to end just over a year's time. And when they finally came out, we saw the way in which they first began by offering sacrifices unto God. And we talked about the way in which Noah coming out, it began also a parallel to the way in which we also, once we got saved, we were saved out of the judgment that would have come upon our own sins in our lives, and we would have been destroyed. And as we are saved and washed and cleansed, and as we begin anew, we begin by worshiping God and putting Him first in our life and in our place. We see that the flood and salvation have a lot of parallels. We talked about the way in which it was the ark that was planned by God. That wasn't Noah's idea, that was God's plan. Just as salvation for us, that was God's plan, that before the foundations of the earth were laid, that before Adam and Eve even sinned, we saw that God had a plan for redeeming mankind, that Christ was willing to come and offer himself up as that sacrifice. We see that there was only one door into the ark, and there's only one doorway into the presence of God, and that doorway is Jesus Christ, and there is no other access into that salvation. We see that the ark saved Noah and his family from the wrath of God's judgment, and we see that Christ, our salvation, is the one that saves us from the wrath of God's judgment. We also know that it was interesting that Enoch, you'll remember, was raptured before the judgment comes. And so in the same way that the church is going to be raptured before the tribulation comes upon the earth. We see that Noah and his family, they had to go through the tribulation, and that is the Jewish remnant. The nation of Israel is going to go through the tribulation, but they will be protected, they will be sealed, they will be saved in the same way that Noah and his family was. We see that the ark ultimately saved mankind, and we see that it is the shed blood of Jesus Christ that saves mankind. And so these tremendous parallels and typologies that we have. Noah and his family, they have exited out of the ark now, and it is time for a new beginning, a fresh start, a reboot on the earth here. And God is going to establish a covenant. And so we are going to see here in this 9th chapter the rainbow. And in verse 1 of this 9th chapter it says, "And so God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, 'Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be on every beast of the earth, on every bird of the air, and on all that move on the earth, and on all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hand.'" We see that as Noah comes out of the ark, is the command that's given to be fruitful and to multiply. The world that Noah entered from the ark was significantly different from the one in which he knew before. And as he exits out, we see that it is the same mandate that he gives to Adam in the beginning, back in Genesis chapter 1. Since Noah essentially really is beginning all over again. Back in Genesis chapter 1, beginning in verse 26, it said, "Then God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness, and let him have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So we see in the same way in which Noah is given dominion, Adam was also given dominion. We see, and it says, "And so God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female. He created them, and then God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." And so we see that there is this restarting. Now, notice that fear was not put into the cattle, which represents the domesticated animals. Verse 3, "Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And I have given you all things, even as the green herbs. But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood." So, as Adam had received these instructions for eating, Adam was to be a vegetarian. We see that Noah now receives permission to eat animals. Permission was not given to Adam. Authorization to eat meat may have been practiced in an unauthorized form before the flood when wickedness had prevailed. But we see that before the covenant with Israel and in the new covenant, the covenant that we are underneath, meat, we see we are allowed to eat the meat of animals without any restrictions. Underneath the law, they would then have restrictions on which meat they were allowed to or not. Underneath the new covenant, there's no restriction. And when Noah comes off of the ark, there were no restrictions put on it whatsoever. But we do see that there was the prohibition against the blood. We see that in the very beginning, right here with Noah, that there is the sensing of the sacredness of blood. Leviticus chapter 17 is going to say, "For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make atonement for your souls, for it is the blood that makes atonement for the soul." So while they were allowed to eat flesh now, they were not allowed to eat flesh. They were not allowed to drink blood or to have partake of the blood with the blood in the flesh. And so we see that today there is no prohibition that we've got against blood transfusions, and so some have taken this out of context. Jehovah's Witnesses will not allow blood transfusions, and so there are many that die each year because of that, but they are not biblically founded by the verses. Verse 5, "Surely for your lifeblood I will demand a reckoning. From the hand of every beast I will require it. And from the hand of man, from the hand of every man's brother, I will require the life of man." We see the sanctity of human life. God says that any animal that kills a person, that animal will be destroyed, that animal now needs to be killed. And any person that kills another person, that person also's life must be taken from them. Verse 6, "Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed, for in the image of God he made man." Prior to the flood, before Noah got onto the ark, we see that men were just killing one another, defending themselves in whatever way that they could. There were no governments, and there was no consequences. There was no laws. And so everybody was just living whatever way they chose to live. But now God is going to institute human government. And with the human government, we see the authority for capital punishment. Prior to the flood, men were ruled by their own conscience. You remember that when Cain kills Abel, that God doesn't kill Cain. that God puts a mark on him, protects him. And so capital punishment, there was no capital punishment up until the flood. But now, after the flood, we see that God institutes the law, and now it says that because we are made in the image of God, and because man is made in the image, his life is inherently precious and cannot be taken without having to give an account to God. By man, his blood shall be shed means that life is valuable, and when murder is committed, then the death penalty is in order. We see three different doctrines now that are affirmed in the New Testament from what is happening in this restart. We see the eating of meat in 1 Timothy chapter 4. It says that the commanding to abstain from foods which God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. For every creature of God is good, and nothing is to be refused if it is received with thanksgiving. And so you'll remember in the early church, you had the Levitical law that restricted the dietary food that the Jews were allowed. And as believers, as Christians, there was the early contest of whether or not Christians were to be underneath these dietary restrictions. And so we see here in Timothy and in many other passages that we are allowed to eat without reservation. We also see the abstinence from blood, that as believers we're not allowed to be drinking blood. Acts chapter 15, you'll remember when they came down to determine how much of the law that Christians needed to keep or not, if there were any parts, and so they wrote back, therefore I judge that we should not trouble those from among the Gentiles who are turning to God, but that we write to them to abstain from things polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, from things strangled, and from blood. And so once again, we see that there is a sanctity to blood and the abstinence from blood. And then also the authority for capital punishment. We see that in the New Testament, Romans chapter 13 talks about the fact that they do not bear the sword in vain, for governments are ministers and avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. So we see that capital punishment is absolutely biblical, and that it is God's desire that we would execute justice upon those that take the life of others. In verse 7, it says, "And as for you, be fruitful and multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth, and multiply in it." Be fruitful and multiply. The point was repeated because it needed emphasis. There needed to be an emphasis on the repopulating of the world as now judgment had fallen, and it was up to Noah and his family and his extended family. And so it was the multiplication that was now going to be needed. So we see the reinforcement of that point. In verse 8, it says, "Then God spoke to Noah and to his sons with him, saying, And as for me, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, and every beast of the earth with you, of all that go out of the ark, every beast of the earth." Animals do not possess an eternal soul and spirit as we do. They are God's creatures. And we see that God is concerned about them and the treatment of animals. You'll remember in Matthew's gospel that Jesus says, "Look at the birds of the air. For they neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. And are you not of more value than they? And are not two sparrows sold for a copper coin? And not one of them falls to the ground apart from your Father's will." In Jonah, It says, "And shall I not pity Nineveh, that great city in which are more than 120,000 persons who cannot discern between their right hand and their left, and much livestock?" We see that God now was mentioning the livestock. The flood was destructive not only to the human race, but it destroyed all of the animals as well. Just those that were on the ark were saved. And so there was a repopulation now that needed to take place amongst the animal kingdom here as well. Floods would have been especially destructive to those animals that can't fly or depend upon the protection of man. And God makes a special point here in this covenant that never again are floods going to take and destroy the animal kingdom. A universal flood will not happen again. And so, verse 11, "Thus I establish my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth." The covenant was made with mankind, you and your descendants after you, and even with the animals, every living creature that is with you. So that is all of the living creatures except for the sea creatures that would have survived the flood. But we see that there was now the covenant was established not only for mankind, but also he promised that he would never again cover the earth with a flood. And the flooding of the earth, you'll remember, was a judgment upon the wickedness that had broken out upon the earth. Now, after the flood, there were many different changes, and we've talked about those changes. We've talked about the thermal blanket that was surrounding the earth, that this was gone, the crust and the upheaval and the changes in this capacity. Sin was judged, and the wickedness that Noah and his family had to live in before the flood, they don't have to live in any longer. That wickedness now has been abated. But also, you'll remember that the angels that had left their first abode and had gone into the daughters of men, they were now put into prison. They were put into chains, and they were chained. So we see that there was the promise that never again is there going to be a flood that's going to destroy the earth. But also we see that God implemented and changes upon the earth that also prevented and changed. We also see that not only was there the imprisonment of those angels, but also there was a shortening of the lifespan of mankind. After the thermal blanket is gone, the radiation that is going to increase is going to radically drop the lifespan of mankind from 900 years down to about 100 years. And this is going to happen absolutely rapidly here as well. So these things here all change, and God at the same time promises that never again is there going to be a flood that is going to destroy the earth. Now, water is not going to be used to judge the earth, but God will destroy the earth once again, but this time it will be by fire and not by flood. In verse 12, it says, "And God said, this is the sign of the covenant which I made between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. I set my rainbow in the cloud, and it shall be for the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. And it shall be when I bring a cloud over the earth that the rainbow shall be seen in the cloud." So a rainbow, they're multicolored in the sky. They're caused by the refraction of sunlight through the droplets of water. And the rainbow requires both sunlight and the clouds, the liquid droplets, and also the sunlight. Before, rainbows were not possible. The canopy would have prevented that from taking place. But now that the canopy is gone, we see that there is the refraction, and God now creates and establishes the rainbow. God used the rainbow now as a sign to Noah and to all generations that he was going to be faithful to his covenant, so that mankind, when it starts to rain outside, we never need to worry that this is the beginning of another flood. Think about if you never knew if the next time it rained, it was going to be a judgment come from God. But God said, you're never going to have to worry about that. And he gave the promise now of the rainbow to be able to give us that security. He says in verse 15, and I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you, and every living creature of all flesh. The waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. And the rainbow shall be in the cloud. And I will look on it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. And God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. 7 times we see the word covenant. It's an everlasting covenant. Means from generation to generation, and the rainbow also, it spans from one end of heaven to the other, and this reminds of God's promise, that God's promises are from eternity to eternity, that they are from beginning to end. And so the rainbow, it is sad that though many admire the rainbow, few associate the rainbow with God's promise. And still many do not believe that there ever was a universal flood, and that rainbow is the promise that God is never going to send another universal flood. We see that the rainbow also reminds us that even in judgment, he remembers mercy, that the glory follows the suffering, and where sin abounded, grace did even more abound. Ezekiel, the rainbow in Ezekiel, the rainbow is seen surrounding the throne of God. The mercy of God, the grace of God, that is the rainbow, the promise to never destroy again. And so the mercy of God. In Revelation chapter 4, the rainbow is also seen around the throne of God. And in Revelation chapter 10, we see that Christ wears a rainbow upon his head, where once he wore a crown of thorns, he will wear a rainbow in glory. And so the rainbow assures us that no good purpose of God relating to us as believers is ever going to be left undone. It is the sign that God says, I'm here, I see, I love you, and I promise that I will not destroy the whole world with you in it. And so what a great and glorious promise that is. In verse 18, we begin to see the repopulation of the earth. Now the sons of Noah who went out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Ham was the father of Canaan. And these 3 were the sons of Noah. And from these the whole earth was populated. The entire earth, now we see today that there are several major races today, between 3 and 6, depending upon the classification or the system. There is roughly 150 nations of significance. We see that there are over 3,000 different tribal languages and dialects that are on the face of the earth. And the origin of races and nations, it is still a mystery to the scientific community. There are numerous different theories that are out there, but they are contradictory. Those among the anthropologists and those amongst the ethnologists as to the true origination of nations and ethnicities and language. But we know where that all came from right here. God shows us that it came from the three sons of Noah, came the nations as we know them. So Noah exits with his sons, and they begin to spread out. And Noah began to be a farmer. And he planted a vineyard. So just as Adam, you'll remember, what did he do? He tended the garden. We see that Noah here is tending the vineyard. And so he plants and sows and reaps. And so this is what he is doing. And it says in verse 21, and then he drank of the wine and was drunk and became uncovered in his tent. This is the first mention of drunkenness in the Bible. Some think that it was only after the flood that you were even able to make an intoxicating drink. Some believe that the fermentation process may not have even been available without radiation, and given the thermal blanket and the temperatures and the conditions upon the face of the earth. But Scripture doesn't hesitate to call out the failures of even the most godly of men and women in the Scriptures. And so we see that Noah comes out, and having gone through that ordeal, I imagine that he just lowers his guard. It's like, yes, we made it through this incredible trial. We're alive, and when he lowers his guard, we see that's when temptation swoops in. 1 Peter 5:8 says, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour." And Noah now comes and he ends up in this drunken condition in his tent, and then he casts off his garments, and now he was in this state of nakedness. And we see that while the judgment of the world has taken place, we see that the heart of man is still the heart of man. And that each and every one of us are sinners that are just saved by grace. And so Noah here enters into a drunken condition, and we see that there were consequences then that happens. It says that he became uncovered in his tent. And so what does that mean? There are differences of opinions with regards to just that he became uncovered in his tent. Some believe that Noah may have been sexually abused in this situation. The phrase become uncovered and the idea of nakedness are sometimes associated with sexual relations. But it says here in verse 22, and Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it on both their shoulders and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's nakedness. Others believe that Ham's sin was in seeing Noah's drunken, uncovered state, and that he makes fun of him. He mocks him and disrespects him as his father and also as a man of of God. His spirit was pleased, like, oh, look at the condition of my dad. And it was a spirit of rebellion that took place. Proverbs 10:12 says that hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all sins. And so Ham sees him, and then he goes and brings his brothers in on it rather than covering his sin. The other sons cover the sin. But we see here that Ham is stirring it up. And so Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his younger son had done to him. And then he said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants he shall be to his brethren." He knew what his younger son had done to him when he awoke from his wine, it says. And so this seems to indicate that whatever happened to Noah may have been more than just the seeing of his nudity, but it doesn't confirm that. It says, cursed be Canaan. Now, it seems strange that when Noah awakes that it's not Ham that's cursed, but Ham's son is Canaan. So he curses Ham's son. Some suggest that Ham's son may have been involved in this as well, though once again the scriptures don't mention it. And others have suggested that sometimes the strongest punishment against a Ham was for Noah to reveal prophetically the destiny of his son in Canaan. But here we see that Noah now declares the prophetic prophecy against Canaan in verse 26, and he said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. And may God enlarge Japheth, and may he dwell in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant." And so the tents of Shem, the people that are going to come out underneath Shem, that's going to be the Jews, the nation of Israel, the Israelites, Arabs, Syrians, Assyrians, Babylonians, and Persians. They all are going to come out of Shem. May God enlarge Japheth, and Japheth is really Europe and then the northern European areas, and then Ham is the Egyptians and Africa and the Mongol tribes, and so we see the difference, and we're going to take a look in just a minute at the various different departures of and the genealogies that we're going to see in our very next chapter. It says, "And Noah lived after the flood 350 years." And so all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. So 350 years, and we see that there's really now nothing that is recorded of those 350 years. And so Noah dies, and as we move now to this 10th chapter, we see that chapters 10 and 11 are kind of going to give us this historical link that connects us to the time of Noah to Abraham. And so how do these connections take place? The genealogies, without the genealogies, we wouldn't really be able to trace back to Noah. But we are going to see in these chapters here that this is going to establish for us the nations and where they came from. And also we're going to see that it's going to lead us into the Tower of Babel and into the rebellion against God. So if I could have the table of nations up on the screen here, we are going to see that this is in the area that is down in the southern area. This is the area of Shem. And then we see that this area that is the orange, we see that this is Japheth, and then we see that the green is Ham. And so they all depart from this area and they head into these different directions, and this is where they end up now establishing their descendants. And so Ham and Japheth and Shem, we see that these now are the sons. Verse 1 of this 10th chapter says, now this is the genealogy of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and sons were born to them after the flood. We are going to kind of get a genealogy of Noah's family, but it's not going to be a vertical one. It's going to be more of a horizontal one. And Shem is the one that we are going to be following through. Ham and Japheth, we are going to get their genealogies, but only as far as the Tower of Babel. And then at the Tower of Babel, that is when the languages are broken up and they are going to depart into their different nations. They're going to become their different nations. And we are going to see then that the line of Shem, the genealogy of Shem, is going to continue. The reason is that it is through Shem and the lineage of Shem that we're going to come to Abraham. And then through Abraham that all the world is going to be blessed. And so the genealogies are going to be shorter on the other two, and then it is going to be longer when it comes to Shem. So he begins here. There are going to be 70 offspring that are going to be mentioned in what's normally or commonly known as the Table of Nations. That's the passage that we are in. And 70 is an interesting number. We have Shem is going to have 26 offspring in this table. Ham is going to have 30, and Japheth is going to have 14. But in the Old Testament, we see that there are 70 elders. We see that Jesus also sent out 70 disciples. We see that there was 70 years was the length of the Babylonian captivity. We see that there were 70 weeks of years that was in Daniel's prophecy of the end times. And so 70 is a number that we see is scriptural throughout the scriptures. In verse 2, it says that the sons of Japheth were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshach, and Tiras. And so this now, from Gomer, we see that this becomes the Germans, the Germanic people, and the French, the Spanish, the Celtics. So Japheth, we see, ends up in Europe, and so this is where Japheth's descendants are going to head. The sons of Gomer were Ashkenaz, Ripheth, and Togarmah. Then we move to the sons of Jarvan, where Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. And from these, the coastland peoples of the Gentiles were separated into their lands, and everyone according to his language, according to their families, into their nations. So the descendants of Japheth, number 14, they are given first, and these are the northern, most remote, and people are going to come from his son Japheth. Next, the sons of Ham. And so Ham, we see, is all of the green. And so they formed the eastern and the southern peoples of Mesopotamia. The sons of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. The sons of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Ramah, and Sabtaka. And the sons of Ramah were Sheba and Dedan. So Cush, we see this family kind of divided into two branches, and some founded Babylon, that would be Nimrod, and others went over into Africa, Ethiopia, and so Cush kind of has a divided branch. Verse 8 tells us, Cush begot Nimrod, and he began to be a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. So we see that Nimrod, one of the things about Nimrod is that when it says that he's a mighty hunter, you and I might think that that's a compliment. It's not a compliment. He wasn't a hunter of animals. He was a hunter of people. And so he was a warlord. And so this now, he was brutal, and it was the beginnings of the kingdom of Babel. And so Nimrod was, he ruled over Babel and was the first organized rebellion of humans against God. And in fact, the name Nimrod itself means let us rebel. And so, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord, this is not a compliment, but the idea is that Nimrod was an offense before the face of God. Like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord, verse 10, in the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. And from that land he went to Assyria and built Nineveh and Rehoboth, Ir, and Calah, and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah. That is the principal city. In verse 13, and Mirzim begot Ludum and Anamin and Lahabim and Naphtuhim and Pathrusim and Calushim, from whom came the Philistines and the Caphtorim. And then Canaan begot Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, the Jebusite, the Amorite, and the Girgashite, the Hivite and Archite, and Sinite, the Arvadite, and Zemarite, and the Hamathite. And afterward the families of the Canaanites were dispersed, and the border of the Canaanites was from Sidon as you go toward Gerar as far as Gaza, and then as you go toward Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboam as far as Lashna. So Canaan now begot Sidon, and the family of Sidon, the son of Canaan, went north and is related to the Hittites and also to the Lebanese. And then these are the sons of Ham according to their families, according to their languages, in their lands, and in their nations. And so now the second of the sons is concluded, Ham. And now we come to Shem and to the sons of Shem. And the children were born also to Shem, the father of all the children of Eber, the brother of Japheth the older. And the sons of Shem were Elam and Asher and Aphaxad and Lud and Aram. And the sons of Aram were Uz and Hul and Gether and Mash. Now, when it says in verse 23 that the sons of Aram were Uz, that Uz is also the of the Chaldeans, where it is that we find that Job is in Uz, and not of the Chaldeans, but Uz is where Job, chapter 1, came from. Verse 24, Arphaxad begot Salah, and Salah begot Eber, and to Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. And Joktan begot Almodad, and Sheleph, and Hazamareth, and Jerah, and Hadaram, and Uzal, and Diklah, and Obal, and Abimael, and Sheba, and Ophir, and Havilah, and Jobab. And all these were the sons of Joktan, and their dwelling place was from Mesha as you go toward Sephar, the mountain of the east. And Jobab, we see here, may be the Job that we have in the Old Testament as well. And these were the sons of Shem, it says, according to the families, according to their languages and their lands, and according to their nations. And these were the families of the sons of Noah, according to their generations, in their nations. And from these, the nations were divided on the earth after the flood. So we see the way in which the sons of Noah now, they spread out, heading to the west to the north and to the east, and we are going to continue to see the rebellion now that is going to take place amongst the people and the sons of Noah. And that rebellion, we see the rebellion that is in man's heart. We see that that is a result of the free will that God has given to each and every one of us. And that when God gave free will to us, that also he knew that we would take that free will and that we would make mistakes, and that those mistakes are sin. But free will also is necessary for us to be able to enter into a loving relationship with God. If God just programmed each of us to love him, then there would not be any love. Then we would just be a doll with a string that would just repeat and pre-programmed phrases that would just simply declare, well, I love you, God, I love you, God, I love you, God, but it would be absolutely meaningless. But for true love to exist, there needs to be that free will. And so God gave each and every one of us that free will and that invitation that if you want to spend eternity with me and you want to enter into a loving relationship, God says, I love you and I want you. Do you want me? And that's the very reason that Jesus Christ came. The plan for the removal of the sin for everybody that loves God, for everybody that chooses God, that costs Jesus Christ his life. The blood of the Lamb is what takes away the sins of the world. And so we come to the communion